When faced with complex, multivariable systems, the human brain defaults to finding the simplest possible math. We isolate a single, easily measurable metric and project it forward in a straight line. This cognitive bias is known as the extrapolation fallacy. It occurs when you take a static variable, run it through basic arithmetic, and completely ignore the surrounding system that dictates how that variable actually behaves in the real world. Public policy is highly susceptible to this trap. A clear example occurred recently regarding maritime drug interdiction and the opioid crisis. Authorities routinely intercept vessels attempting to smuggle illicit narcotics across international waters. In 2020, President Donald Trump stated that neutralizing a single boat carrying 25,000 lethal doses of fentanyl equates directly to saving 25,000 American lives. This image shows actual evidence bags of seized fentanyl. A single lethal dose is roughly 2 milligrams. The logic dictates that dividing the total physical weight of the seized cargo by 2 milligrams yields the exact number of theoretical lives saved. Drug policy researchers reject this linear equation. When authorities seize a shipment, the illicit supply chain immediately scales up production and alters logistics to replace the lost inventory. The broader market instantly adapts to the disruption. The macro mortality data exposes the mathematical disconnect. Between May 2022 and April 2020, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recorded over 73,000 overdose deaths, a metric driven by systemic demand that remains unaffected by the seizure of individual vessels. The one-to-one calculation is an emotional coping mechanism. It applies neat, controllable math to an uncontrollable crisis, manufacturing the illusion of a solved problem. This exact same cognitive trap dictates the behavior of a rapidly growing subset of early retirees. They attempt to solve decades of future financial uncertainty using a single mathematical projection. The strategy is called coast fire. The premise is to aggressively front-load retirement accounts in your 20s or 30s, cease all contributions entirely, and rely exclusively on compound interest to hit a final wealth target at traditional retirement age. The appeal relies on momentum. After an initial period of heavy lifting, gravity takes over. The system supposedly runs itself. The model starts with the 4% rule. If an investor expects to spend $50,000 annually in retirement, they divide that figure by 4%, establishing a total required portfolio target of $1.25 million. This diagram maps the core coast fire formula. Present value equals future value divided by 1 plus the expected return rate to the power of time. By isolating the variables, investors calculate the exact moment they can stop saving. At age 40, targeting $1.25 million by age 65, an investor assumes a static 7% real return. The formula outputs a present value requirement of roughly $275,000. With that sum invested today, a smooth line traces perfectly to the finish line. That protection relies on the complete absence of systemic friction. It assumes market returns, inflation, and personal expenditures will all remain perfectly static for 25 years. Assuming a fixed investment today guarantees financial security decades from now is the extrapolation fallacy applied to personal finance. The math is perfect, but the inputs ignore the reality of a volatile system. The first major stress test to this model is the unpredictable nature of inflation and future purchasing power. The coast fire formula relies on a static 7% real return. This figure actively masks the extreme volatility of underlying inflation rates by rolling them into a single smoothed-out average. This logic tree maps the vulnerability. On the left is the coast fire claim. On the right, the systemic variable of inflation severs the connection between today's investment and tomorrow's spending power. The formula's baseline expectation relies on the Federal Reserve's long-term target of an average 2% annual inflation rate. Historical reality contradicts that average. In 2022, the economy absorbed an aggressive 9.1% spike in inflation. A single macroeconomic event like this permanently alters the baseline cost of living for decades. The prices of goods compound upward, and they rarely retreat to prior levels. If that 2% average fails, the $1.25 million target calculated today will will mathematically fail to cover the targeted $50,000 lifestyle in 25 years. The purchasing power of the portfolio collapses under the invisible weight of compounded inflation. Relying on a static inflation assumption transforms compounding growth from a mathematical advantage into a dangerous source of false security. The second systemic stress test is market volatility, specifically the danger of sequence of returns risk. Coast Fire relies on the logical flaw that the stock market will provide an uninterrupted, smooth annualized return over a quarter century. Markets do not grow in straight lines. Sequence of returns risk is the destructive power of when market losses occur relative to your investment timeline. The timing of a crash dictates the survival of the portfolio. This illustrates a worst-case scenario. The starting portfolio suffers a sheer 20% drop in year one, right after contributions stop. Because the principal is reduced, the compounding line flattens out permanently, missing the $1.25 million target at age 65 by a wide margin. Traditional investors survive crashes by continuing to contribute and buying the dip. A Coast Fire investor has voluntarily shut off their only recovery engine. Linear market math ignores reality. Early volatility combined with a zero contribution strategy permanently breaks the retirement model. The final and most volatile stress test is the unpredictable nature of human biology and lifestyle creep. Consider a real-world case study documented in the fire community. A couple who achieved Coast Fire at age 30 with a portfolio of $680,000. The math worked flawlessly, but it required a strictly static lifestyle. They lived frugally in a 400-square-foot studio apartment and spent their time traveling. 8 years later, biology took over. They had a baby. The studio was no longer viable. They required a 3-bedroom home in a family-friendly neighborhood. That meant entering the Vancouver real estate market. The financial reality of that single life event required buying into a localized market where prices had surged to nearly $2 million. This triggered an inescapable mathematical trap. To afford the necessary declaring a coast number provides an immediate dopamine hit. It offers a mathematically justified excuse to cure career burnout and exhaustion today. Prioritizing immediate psychological relief blinds the investor to the lack of clear future visibility. The emotional danger is equating this temporary relief with the permanent absolution of financial responsibility. Traditional accumulation continuously respects systemic risk. It requires the ongoing discipline of building safety buffers specifically to absorb unexpected life events. Choosing to definitively stop saving is an emotional decision to ease present-day stress, masquerading as a mathematically sound strategy for the future. The rigorous alternative to static extrapolation is the continuous, dynamic recalibration of financial models. Coast Fire functions excellently as a moving milestone to measure historical progress. It should never be treated as a definitive finish line to stop working or saving. This financial dashboard illustrates a robust plan. Variables for income, localized inflation, and precise spending targets are manually adjusted and recalculated every single year. This continuous planning logs ongoing contributions, expanding a measurable margin of safety that a static Coast Fire model entirely lacks. Reaching the destination requires constantly adapting to a changing environment. True financial security is never found in a single, extrapolated equation. It is built through the rigorous, continuous fact-checking of our own assumptions against an unpredictable reality.